blessed to be the youngest and the oldest mayor of Lawrence.
Oh, you're coming back for that.
We are coming back.
Okay, we are good. Okay,
Are we live?
we are live.
We're live. Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. We are going to do some introductions later. When you see the part later that says Steering Committee Icebreaker, the first thing you're going to do is introduce yourself, and then you're going to answer that question. What is a beneficial change that you've seen in Lawrence community in your time here? So I'm priming you to be ready to answer that question as well as introduce yourself. So we're not going to start by introducing everybody. We'll do it at that point as we go around the room, because we have some exciting stuff to start with.
There's too kind.
I mean, really, Becky is here to give us some rules of how to run a meeting as well as some information on the open meetings.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So first, just some housekeeping items. This is a hybrid meeting, so just wanted to go through a couple things. My name is Becky Pepper. I'm the planning manager. And we have Kyle Kobe that is working the Zoom video portion of the meeting. And so we'll work alongside the chair to facilitate these meeting proceedings. The meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. For those of you joining via Zoom, please mute yourself during the meeting when you're not speaking. The chat function of this meeting is disabled and all chats will go directly to the Zoom facilitator. And unless you're participating in the meeting, please turn off your video. This will allow the active meeting participants to be seen on screen, and you can still be able to hear the meeting. When you're participating, though, you can turn your video back on. And if you have any trouble, you can send a chat to the Zoom facilitator. The city does reserve the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions. And I think with that, I will head into the COMA presentation.
Please do.
All right. If you will allow me to give you a brief training on our Kansas Open Meetings Act, and then we will get this boring stuff out of the way and move on to the fun stuff as quickly as possible. The Kansas Open Meeting Act was enacted by a Kansas legislature in 1972. And it is described as the cornerstone of public access to local and state government. As such, its fundamental purpose is to require local and state government to conduct business of the public in public. COMA applies when two criteria are met. That the governmental body is a covered entity, and when that covered entity conducts a meeting as defined by COMA. The first of these two criteria is defined on this slide. COMA defines covered entity as all legislative and administrative bodies, state agencies, and political and taxing subdivisions that receive or expend or are supported in whole or in part by public funds. And in case you're wondering, the steering committee is considered a covered entity. The second criteria that requires COMA to be applied is when a meeting occurs. And under COMA, a meeting occurs when there's any gathering or assembly in person or through the use of interactive communications such as phone or email. The meeting must also be made by the majority of the membership of the body, which in this case is 8 members. And it must be for the purpose of discussing the business of the body. So in the next few slides, we'll cover those 3 details and cover those items in more detail. Interactive communication can occur through various means. The most obvious is going to be in-person meetings with the majority of members present, but it can also include phone calls, work sessions, staff briefings, video conferencing, and online communications. The mere fact that a communication is electronic does not raise a COMA issue, but it can in certain instances. For example, one email to another member would not implicate COMA, but an email to the entire steering committee might. So in that vein, be wary of hitting reply all if you do receive an email that all the other steering committees have received. As I mentioned, this body, there are 14 members on the steering committee, and so the majority of the body is 8. And then the last item that must occur for it to meet that definition of COMA is that discussion or meet the definition of meeting is if there's a discussion of business of the body. So individual members of the steering committee and even the majority may gather at any time, so long as they don't discuss business of the steering committee. Social gatherings or events are not subject to COMA as long as 8 or more members do not engage in discussion of the business or affairs of the steering committee. You may also attend conferences or events where items of general interest are discussed, even those related to planning or items we may be discussing here, so long as 8 or more members do not discuss the business of the body. This relates to electronic communications as well. The Attorney General has indicated that the mere fact that a communication is electronic does not raise a COMA issue, as previously stated. However, if the majority of the body does use electronic communication to engage in that interactive discussion, it would become a COMA issue. So again, going back to that email example, if a single email is sent to other steering committee members, it would not likely be considered a violation, but participation in a reply all or an online chat or instant messaging, those could be considered a violation of COMA if because of its interactive nature. So it should be noted that Facebook posts by steering committee members concerning the business of the body could constitute a meeting under COMA. In 2020, the Kansas Attorney General found that a majority of board members that were posting back and forth on social media about a recent government body vote did engage in a meeting. So the takeaway is that it's important to keep in mind that the use of advanced technology can directly affect compliance with those important laws. Members are encouraged to act with caution when posting on Facebook or other social media and be mindful of whether other members are communicating or commenting, because engaging in a discussion with the majority in any format will likely constitute a violation of COMA. So again, in that vein, avoid initiating an online discussion with other steering committee members through email. In the event that you receive an email about a city matter that other committee members were also sent or copied, again, avoid hitting reply all. Along those same lines, COMA also prohibits serial meetings. So a serial meeting would be a series of interactive communications involving less than a majority of the community members that collectively involve the majority as those communications are sent down the line. Again, the meeting must share a common topic of discussion concerning the business or affairs of the body. They must be intended by any or all participants to reach an agreement or decision on any issue that would require binding action at an open meeting. So in review, COMA applies when the body involved is a covered entity and when there is a meeting. And a meeting occurs when there is interactive communication by the majority of the body and the business of the body is discussed. In addition to the regulations on communications, COMA also has requirements on all on meetings that are open to the public, that they be noticed and that they be held in places accessible to the public and be conducted so that the public may observe or listen to the proceedings. COMA says to properly notice meetings, you must notice the date, time, and place of any regular or special meeting if someone requests that. And finally, it does say that it doesn't require that an agenda be created for the meeting. However, if one is created, it should include the topics that are planned for discussion. And however, it does not allow agendas. It does allow for agendas to be amended. And then finally, if an agenda exists, copies must be made available to those who request them. So I do apologize. I ran through some dry subject matter as quickly as possible to get you on the fun stuff, but is there any questions about any of that? I know for some of you, you've had this training many times.
You did a good job. I've been involved with this and appreciate the overview.
All right, thank you very much.
The clarity was good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, with that, we'll get to the more fun stuff. Thank you all for agreeing to serve on this steering committee. And some of you might be wondering what that means and what you've volunteered for. And, you know, as the city commission, we're excited to get going with this process. This development code update has been long coming, and it's, needed under Plan 2040 and needed just because we haven't looked at it for a while. And it's going to be a long process to get to the end. It's going to be a process that includes the public, which they've already started on, and includes all of you helping inform and working with our consultants to get a project that eventually gets to the city commission. So kind of on that, we did have a process in which we hired a great consulting group to be part of this, the Clarion Group. And we're going to start this with Elizabeth Galvin from Clarion is going to give us kind of an orientation of what the project is, what's the role of our committee as we see it, and then we'll get to some of the other items on the agenda.
All right, give it a short PowerPoint. Can everyone hear me at the other end of the room? Okay, all right. So I'm gonna go through this really quickly and we're gonna switch into discussion things. I'm gonna let everybody know I have some hearing problems and wear hearing aids. And if you see me over here fiddling with my phone, it's because I'm cranking up the volume so I can hear you. Okay. And every now and then I might say, hey, could you please repeat that? But I try to get it all in and we'll move forward from there. So I appreciate your patience. I'll not text my kids while we're sitting. Okay, let's go ahead. So we did our opening remarks. Thank you, Chairman Finkeldine. And we had the really hopping Kansas Open. There's no fun there, is there? No. Yeah, so project orientation. Let's do the project overview. Let's switch to the next slide, please. And what are our opportunities to see the whole slide? So let's play with that. I'm going to start us. This is the drafting timeline for the project. We're really grateful that we've seen some of you in earlier meetings, and we're equally grateful that some of you are here for the first time. So if you've heard this before, just tune in again one more time, and we'll walk you through what we're going to do. Thank you so much for that. And then this will also let you know kind of where we're going to be involved in the project. And so we are finishing up the project orientation. It's August into September. I think tomorrow's September. And project orientation is really for your consultancy. And that's me. I'm Elizabeth Garvin. I'm with Clarion's Denver office. I'm here with Gabby Hart, our associate in our office. I'm here with Matt Goebel, who's one of our directors. And I saw Holly White's smiley face down here somewhere. Holly does our graphics and helps us get ourselves to more user-friendly product. And so one of the things that we're reaching for in this code is a more user-friendly product. So we've got Holly here thinking visually for us so we can understand how that code lands in the end. So we do this project orientation where we're in town, we're talking to staff, we're talking to the public, we're talking to all of you. We've had yesterday and today. Can we flip to the next slide? Thank you. So we've done some roundtable meetings up through transportation yesterday and today. So we met with people that wanted to be in the room on environment and natural resources, historic resources, rural areas, housing infrastructure, and transportation. Tomorrow we'll have a meeting that's organized around chamber and business issues and concerns. While all of these meetings have had a topic, they've also been open to any part of the code you want to talk about. But not surprisingly, since we pulled the topics from Plan 2040, we've gotten a lot of information about the topics. In fact, we got off to a bit of a slow start and we've been picking up speed, and we have been learning great amounts of information in hour and a half increments, so much so that we're probably going to expand to some more virtual meetings and try to reach out to some more of the community and see what else we can get. So we'll tell you more about that later. We've also done some open house meetings in North Lawrence and downtown at the train station, East Lawrence at the rec center. Is that where you guys were? West Lawrence will be tomorrow at the sports complex, and South Lawrence we were at Holcomb Park today. So our open house meeting where we've moved out into the community, not such great attendance yet. And it's that time of year, it's back to school. We're just getting the project going. We happen to think a lot of people in Lawrence are going to want to say something about the project. So this would be another place where we look to put our questions and information out electronically, and then also thinking about whether we need to get out to the community one more time as we move forward. And that'll be something we talk about as a group, right? Part of this group's work will be thinking about how we talk about this project internally and how we talk about it externally. Go back 2 slides. Oh, I'm sorry, 1 slide. Let's do that one. Okay. So we're oriented. We're moving into code assessment. Code assessment is an assessment of the current regulations against the plans that guide the change. And we come up with a framework document for the new regulations. Or not in long sentences, we're going to write a report about the work we're going to do. And the goal of that report is to frame the changes that we see taking place in the code over time to get initial public feedback. And so we write that report, more in a report format, less in code format. And we say things like, hey, we know we need to get in to the outdoor lighting regulations and move ourselves away from what is perhaps an overly complex form of regulation into something that we can do more jointly and make sure everyone's on the same page. That's our initial perception coming out of these meetings. So we share that with the community. We share that with the steering committee. We gather more input and then we move forward into drafting. We draft in 3 large segments, 3 installments. And these are designed to put like information together and also to let everybody who we're asking to put the time into reviewing this document do it in phases and not sit down with one full code. So we'll draft zone districts and uses in one section. We'll draft development standards, and that's like parking and lighting and could be design, all the things that cut across multiple lots and developments. That'll be the second section. And also subdivision goes in with development standards for the most part, and then administration and procedures. So how do we administer the code, and where are our opportunities for flexibility or for streamlining, or as we've learned over the last couple of days, where are our opportunities to move ourselves from fairly subjective standards and requirements to more objective or meaningful standards and requirements. So that'll be one of the things that we're looking forward to doing in the code. We will draft those and just like the code assessment, share them out with everybody. One of the other goals of this process is to be really transparent. The code gets adopted publicly in the end. So there's no real secret place in there. It doesn't work well. So we just throw it out there and let people think about it and comment on it. So our goal is to encourage people to read the draft and comment on it. And if they want to talk to us about it, we want to be there to talk to them about it. Our team is working with a core team from the city staff, also working with an extended group of city staff. We are trying to make sure that everyone in the city is pretty aware of the project and can funnel people into this conversation. So a couple ways for you guys to help. We have some business cards sitting right here that we'll send around. Everyone can take 1 or 2, and they have the project website on it. And sometimes you can get people in to share business cards with them. Or, you can just direct people to the staff or, into the project in a meeting. So we've drafted all of this. We've taken comments. We've considered where the revisions go. Towards the end of next year, we start pulling together what we call our consolidated draft. So that's all 3 sections together at one time. First time it all comes together. And when we get there, we find we need to do some cleanup because there are some pieces that grind a little more than they should. So we do a little more cleanup and then we get to a final land development code. So I've explained in about 4 minutes what we're going to spend the next 2 years of our lives doing together. But if you know from this high where we're going, it's easy to remember when you're way down in the weeds somewhere. Let's go back up.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
This work constitutes a pretty substantial change in code, clearly at the end, you'd imagine that. I wonder when you get down to adoption and final land, what is your company's role in helping us land that change management within our community, within the workings of the city? And do you also help us think about how we reflect new code against things that are in the existing code where those things might not?
So those questions thread all the way through the project. In order for us to write a code that reflects the community, we need to have had conversations about community differences. How do we like to do this? Or, why is this thing broken? And if we fix it this way, is that really going to fix it? So some of those conversations, easy and hard, we'll be having across the drafting process. It doesn't help our time. It doesn't help our time for us to just sit down and write something and say, here you go. So we're going to go ahead and dive in and ask the question, why is it that the city commission is fiddling around with XYZ thing? And is there a different way that we can do that? So hopefully we have set ourselves up to answer things in a way that works for Lawrence.
So change adoption is inherent in the process of the.
Absolutely. We've got to learn our change as we go.
Gotcha.
It's really hard to learn it at the end. And so, and also it's a conversation about change, right? So we want to bring everybody along. It's people dig their heels in if you throw change at them.
Yeah.
So we do that.
Thank you.
Then on the other end, we're here for the adoption process. We are here through what is hopefully the happy end, not the bitter end, and for the celebration afterwards, and talking to staff about the changeover, the rollover, and how we work new code and old code together. Thank you. Okay. Back up. Project overview. I'm going to just talk about a few things where we are early on about expectations, and we know that a committee kind of comes together and gels over time. But we do want to share with you some of, what we think you bringing to the project, your knowledge and your insights about the community are probably the most invaluable thing that you're bringing to this project. Everyone's here because you know something about what goes on in this. And so that goes back to the question we just answered. We all need to understand what goes on in Lawrence to make a code that works for Lawrence. So we'll be looking for your knowledge and insights. We will also ask you to provide us advice about update concepts and issues that we're touching on. We will bring things to you more in the form of a concept and an issue than in, can you just read this section and edit it for us? It's not what we're looking for from you guys. But, we might come in and say, well, there are 3 different ways to get to better commercial design than we're seeing. And so let's talk through the 3 different ways, and we might decide we can toss 2 of them and keep 1. So that would be as we're trying to narrow down and focus on how to approach something. We'll also ask you to help us guide the outreach messaging. You're going to know how we talk to Lawrence. What do we want to say? Where do we want to go with that? What are people already knowledgeable about, and where do we need to back up and do some education? And so those are things we'll ask, because as we're doing our drafting work, we will have outreach going the entire time, because we want people to know that they're welcome in the project. What we don't need you guys to do, and hopefully everyone's going to breathe easy, nobody has to draft code. We will draft and present it to you. You can read it and you can talk to us about it, but we don't expect you to come into the meetings having done a red line edit or whatever your favorite color is, purple edits, doesn't matter. We're conceptual, we're ideas. You'll see the draft. And if there's something that just really makes you think, we can talk about it. But really the expectation is to have a conversation about how it works at a bigger level and not the language of it. We also won't put you in a position of voting out preferences. We'll talk through things. If we find, we have a split consent, we have a split in the group about something or another, we'll figure out how to send ideas forward that way. But the goal is for you to be trusted advisors and, bring us along in the process, not to say, hey, you have to be a zoning expert and you have to pick. So that's how we're trying to stay in a place of using what you're bringing to the table to everyone's best advantage. Last one, opportunities for input. Not necessarily from you guys. This is more about the business part. Let's go 2 slides down, 3, right there. One of the things that we ask during committee do is be active in the community as the face of the project and towards the project. And so right now, there are a few ways for people to get involved in the project. If they want to submit specific comments, there is a place, there's an email address, and it's available on the website. That's development code updates@lawrencekansas.org. So if you have a paragraph or a treatise or whatever you want to submit early on, get it in, get ahead of everybody, that's where that goes. If somebody wants to sign up to receive emails about project updates, you go in through lawrence.org, community engagement and development code update, and you check that you want to get the planning and development newsletter. That's going to have information about the project in it. And then finally, if someone wants to find the outreach schedule or participate in the current survey, there is a survey up currently. You can go to lawrencekansas.org/LDC. And that's on the cards that we've handed out to everybody. So different ways to get involved now. And these will probably consolidate down a little bit as we move forward and have more things going in the outreach schedule. So I think that's it. That's it. So we're going to do an introductions. And our icebreaker question is, tell us about a beneficial change that you've experienced or been a part of or witnessed in the community. Focus on change, updating the land development code, takes in a lot of the conversations that you guys are having separately or together about change and brings them into the regulations. And the things we want to start with is a thought about successful change that we've seen in the community. Change over time. Some things really well, some things, no. So, but let's start with the positive, and we'll go around the table. I'm going to ask you first, if you don't mind.
And you've been around a while.
Exactly.
A little bit. So I wrote down that a beneficial change has been neighborhood and area plans. I think focusing on the district and allowing for development that doesn't have to be, community-wide, but can just affect an area has been really helpful to Lawrence because we are a diverse community. With this opportunity to talk, I also want to mention, I'm so appreciative of having the opportunity to be part of this group because my legislative experience is difficult at best. So being part of a group that's really focusing on finding real suggestions and solutions is just a delight. Thank you.
But Cindy, go ahead and I'm sure everyone here knows you, but just to model for everyone else, go ahead and say your name, what you do, a little bit about yourself and why you're on the committee, basically, as we get into that.
Okay. Senator Marcy Francisco, a resident of the Oriad Neighborhood Association, a resident in Lawrence since 1974, and a part of the Oriad Neighborhood Association, serving on the city commission, serving as a member of the zoning. What are we? The zoning commission?
Yeah.
League of Women Voters, but just really caring about this community and so appreciative of all the others who have demonstrated their interest in moving us forward.
It's gonna be hard to follow.
But Rebecca gets to try.
Yay. Rebecca Buford. I am the Executive Director of Tenants to Homeowners, and I have been developing affordable housing in the Lawrence community for 22 years. And that's what brings me to this group. And one of the most positive changes recently in our silo, but I think it reflects, kind of some of the change we need in the development code is the smart density bonus, where we pushed our foot and opened the door a little bit for some density because we had a lot of people, most of my people that need affordable housing are seniors, singles, and millennials. So, we have this idea of this big need for big single family houses. And the reality is most people in Lawrence need little things, littler houses. So looking at, well, gosh, we could lower our cost if we just allowed to build 2 little houses on 1 lot. And that was exciting because I think, again, it just made us like, okay, we weren't ready to have massive, dense apartment complexes, but 2 little houses and what we found is that's all over older neighborhoods, right? That exist well before the good old mother-in-law house. Right? You're not supposed to call it that anymore, but we all know those. And so I love that we're kind of circling back around to that idea. What do we need in this community, which is a variety of shapes and sizes of housing types and a good mixture of them. And so I love that we're embracing that because I think Lawrence embraces a good eclectic mixture. That's part of what gives us the character of Lawrence. And the reality is if we don't have a mixture of housing types allowed by development code, we're going to lose that healthy mixture. So that's what I want to see not happen.
I'm Gary Rexroad. I've been in Lawrence 22 years and I've come to understand that you can't be a Lawrencian unless you're either born here or die here. So while I won't ever be able to enjoy the title, I do plan to earn it. I've been a part of the Lawrence community in a number of different ways. Currently serve on the Planning Commission and am operating as a member of the steering committee as we're calling it a shadow member to provide continuity for Planning Commission representation as Jim Carter's role changes. There's so many things that are positive I could cite, but just one simple thing that I really enjoy my family does is our appreciation for prioritization of multimodal transportation and how that's shown up in the expansion of our trail system.
I'm Danielle Davey. I am here as the real estate representative. I'm currently serve as the governmental affairs director for the Lawrence Board of Realtors, and I'm also a practicing attorney here in town. I do a lot of real estate law, but I also do a lot of like child and native care, foster care stuff, which gets me involved with families looking for housing. And I see how difficult it is, particularly for folks who are on the low income side or who have poor rental histories or things like that. So housing plays a big role in multiple different areas of my practice. So I was trying to think about some development. I've been here for 21 years, and I've been trying to think of development that was positive in that time. And what I kept coming back to was a lot of sort of community amenities that we've really invested in as a community. The Lawrence Loop, the new library that was built, Rock Chalk Park, really as a community invested in a lot of amenities that we can all enjoy together. So I think that's a very positive development.
Thanks. My name is Eric Wagner. I'm representing general contractor builders for the committee. I serve on the Lawrence Home Builders Association board. And as I was thinking about the positive, I've been in Lawrence 25 years. Becky kind of hit on density and the changes for setbacks that allow some diversity for like how we orchestrate neighborhoods and do developments. The accessory dwelling unit, is interesting. That provided opportunities for, some housing for people that wouldn't necessarily need a large house. And then most recently, I got to participate in a live work development, which was kind of fun to do. And we'll see how successful that is over the next few months. Hopefully we can get them sold. So I'm excited to be on the board and learn more about the development side that gets me to building houses.
My name is Nick Kuzmiak. I serve on the Multimodal Transportation Commission. I'm the current chair. I'm probably the newest and youngest person on this board. I've been here for 5 years. So this is the first place that I've moved to over a lot of places that I've lived that I've liked enough to want to get involved in. So it's great that there's also the opportunity to get involved in. That was not the case in Houston, Austin, Philly, and DC. So it's nice to finally be in a place that I like enough to want to, utilize my passions for urbanism, transportation, all that kind of stuff. So that's my background. The beneficial change that I've seen, I'm going to get a little technical, but Article 9 of the Land Development Code was redone back in 2020, I think. And I think it was a pretty positive change for the most part. There's a lot of really sort of detailed changes that were part of the overall evolution of parking, loading, and access standards. But I think overall, it was a beneficial change. And I think it also showed kind of how different silos can work together. So between the Planning Commission, city staff, MMTC, and also city commission, I think we got a pretty good outcome between the 4 of our silos. So yeah, Article 9. Oh yeah, I'm an environmental engineer by trade. I like details.
Well, I am an attorney. My name is Travis Herod. I've lived in Lawrence for 20 years, all in when you throw in KU undergrad. I've lived in a number of communities around the nation, and like Nick, I found myself here. And I'm happy to be here, and I might earn my Lawrenceian title as well before it's all through. I am appointed as a member of the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods. I'm in my third term as chairperson of that organization. I don't know if that's a sign of esteem or if I just can't get out of the room fast enough. So I'm really happy to be here with so many, great, I recognize a lot of you people. I look forward to getting to know those that I don't know. When Brad asked us to talk about an improvement that I've seen to the community, I can remember when I was here as an undergrad, I was chairperson of KU on Wheels, the transportation board, for 2 years. And that was the only public transportation in Lawrence at that time. And it was around that time that the city and KU started talking about least synergies that could be experienced between KU on Wheels and Lawrence public transportation. If there's those of you that don't remember KU on Wheels, well, it's because some synergies did happen. So imagine, my delight when I came back to Lawrence that KU on Wheels is gone and we have a great and very robust public transportation program. So I remember I was there at the beginning of that, and I remember I continued to be impressed by the commitment that our community has shown towards that. I think here in the year, we're going to have, or very shortly, we're going to have free buses for a year. I think that's amazing. And you were talking about your clientele, my clientele would love that. We live in a time of forced mobility. So being able to get on a safe and reliable form of transportation and go where you need to go is amazing. So there, I think I covered everything.
I'm Tim Stoltz. I'm, I think, the development industry appointee. I was born in Lawrence, so I am Lawrenceian, 1969, just down the street here. And I'm thinking about it, I think the second high school being built was probably a pretty big deal. I remember probably in 1987 when I thought I was a really good baseball player, tried out for the baseball team. Surely I was the 18th best baseball player in town. They kept 17. So I really appreciate the fact that there is a second sports team on all of them. But I joke, I don't think I was the 18th best baseball player. But I enjoy baseball. So.
Hi, my name is Kay Johnson, and I'm the Sustainability and Environment Manager for Proseco. And I am also the representative for the Sustainability Advisory Board. And a positive is I feel like, I've been in Lawrence for 8 years, but I believe that the Land Development Code, the last time it was developed, probably didn't have a Sustainability Advisory Board representative. Since the last year, when the strategic plan was developed by the city, a significant portion was devoted to sustainability issues and elements that are incorporated into all the divisions of the city. So overall, I'm really excited to be at the table, be able to provide input from our advisory board. And I know that all of you are interested in some elements of sustainability for Lawrence because you're here.
I'm Philip Struble. Have a company called Land Plan Engineering. I think I'm representing the engineering design group of Lawrence. And I've been here since 1986. And throughout that whole time, been very intimately involved in the growth of Lawrence and zoning issues, land use issues, growth of Lawrence, what's going on. So I know that pretty well. And I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to improving what we got, and I think there's a way to get to something that's going to be beneficial for all the voices that are at this table. Probably one of the most beneficial things, and I was thinking about this weekend with the news of Gary Tobin passing, I think one of the beneficial things I've been involved in, and I've seen it, was the creation of East Hills Business Park. back in the late 1980s. And, you know, the park, you know, it's kind of I'm not so sure I'd even call it a success, but what the outcome of that was a community group called DCDI. That then turned into the Lawrence Economic Development Commission that the city participates in, the county participates in. And what's unique about that is it provides a voice for something that most of us on a regular basis don't think and talk about, and that is the industrial growth of Lawrence. We all spend a lot of time and our focus is on our families and residential and neighborhoods and those kind of topics. And the industrial component in recruiting people to come to town, quality jobs, finding a quality place for them to work on a regular basis. And this provides a platform for that normally would not exist if it wasn't for the creation of that. So I keep thinking back on what a unique creation that was for all of us.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commission representative here. Been in Lawrence since 1992, so I guess we're at 30 years. In the same house for 28 years now. In the Barker neighborhood. We moved into the Barker neighborhood in 94, and within 2 weeks, I was secretary of the Barker Neighborhood Association. So was an officer in that association up until, I guess, around 2000, where I started being the land rep. And then I was an officer in land up until 2005 as treasurer, and got to learn tons from Marcy during that time because she was a regular attendee back then. And 6 years on the Board of Zoning Appeals from, I think, 2015 to 2012. And now I've been on the Planning Commission since January of 2016. Land plan engineering has forced me to learn lots and lots and lots about the code. And I always look forward to when Paul Werner's there because we always get into nitty gritty sometime. And I think it's always helpful in the long run. So I've learned tons from a lot of people around the table here. What do I think Plan 2040 is the biggest thing we've done recently. I think I'm the only one in the room whose name is actually in this thing on this. But that's why we're here, to make the code fit Plan 2040. We've seen the density issues pop up. We have equity issues we have to address that go along with that, with the lot prices and everything else that has to do with everything. How do we mix things up and make this a more accessible community for everybody and all the types of land uses that we have?
I'm Deborah Ford. I'm an architect. That's the position that they asked me to fill on the committee. I have been in Lawrence since for a long time, over 30 years. Went to school here and stayed. I've seen a lot of movement while I've been here with the transportation, which has been awesome. The trails have been huge for my family and for, exercise and just being able to reach and walk. The pedestrian plan has been great. And the fact that we're looking at land development code and improving it and making it give us guidance in the future is exciting to me.
Brad Finkeldye, an attorney here in town, been here for 25 years. Live in the Hillcrest neighborhood, lived in Prairie Park before that, and served on the Planning Commission for 6 years. And I agree with everyone here on, just trying not to repeat, Plan 2040 was going to be one of mine. Trail, some of these other ones. But I guess what I will say is, when I was on the Planning Commission, we spent a lot of time. I remember one of my favorite meetings, it was 2 a.m. and we were talking about where the bench should go. The bench being closer to, to here or closer to there. And we made some changes to the code after that freed up some of that and allowed to focus on the big picture. And did we go maybe far enough? Maybe not, but I know Jim and Gary and others had some late meetings, but at least you're not talking about benches at 2 a.m. And I do think, you know, we've seen this, we've seen changes over time. And I look forward to this not just being a small change to a code, but, you know, starting over with a vision and having a brand new code that we can work from. And like I said, I appreciate all of you being here to help in that process.
Am I the last person? Wow, okay. Since I'm last, I'm gonna take the liberty. In full disclosure, I'm hungry right now. So when Brad asked about, you know, the improvements, beneficial change, I immediately thought 3 restaurants opened during the time I've lived here. Taco Zone, Leeway Frank's, and Thai Diner. Okay. So I'll start with that. My name's Derek Kwan. I work at the Lead Center of Kansas, which is the Performing Arts Center here in Lawrence and at KU. Other than Nick, I have lived here the least amount of time. For the committee, I've lived here since January of 2014. Our family moved here. And in all seriousness, I think the most beneficial change that I've seen, it actually relates to what Phil Struble mentioned. And it is the adoption and then the subsequent extension of the Catalyst program, which benefits industrial development, which I think is, you know, a great program for the city and great program for our community. So I will conclude by saying that I really appreciate the opportunity to serve on this committee. I'm currently the chair of the chamber board, and that is the quote unquote role I'm filling. And I love coming together with folks that come from very different backgrounds and diverse backgrounds and having conversations. I think it's super valuable, and it's what we need today in this current state of society.
Since I had to go first, I'm going to mention that I was the one that proposed the consent agenda for the city commission. We saved a lot of time, and I'm also an evil landlord.
All right. Thank you all. That was a great list. That's great. You all have been here a long time. There's a lot of longevity in this room, and you've seen a lot of change for the most part. And it's inspiring. It's actually a great opportunity for us to build on with new change. Again, Matt Goebel with Clarion Associates. I'm part of the Clarion team. So we now want to switch the conversation a little bit more towards moving forward. You've talked about a lot of the change that you've seen, but we want to transition this conversation into what you want to get out of this process and what your priorities are. And maybe you can be a little critical about some of the things you've seen in the past, but also really, what do you want? How do you define success for a new land development code for Lawrence? So we have a slide here that talks about some big picture questions. This is to get you all thinking about some of the things that we'll be thinking about as we rewrite your code. This is not an exhaustive list. There's important things that are not on this list, and we can cover them like sustainability, but these are some things that we'd like to maybe get you thinking about. I'm going to walk through these, just explain what we're thinking, and then we'd like to go around the table again and have you talk about your priorities. And just because of the size, we'll probably ask you to think about your top 2. Think about the top 2 things that you'd like to see. So a lot of issues to cover in a zoning code update. One of the first things is zoning districts. You know, we think about the way that the city is geographically divided into, you know, a slate of residential districts, residential single family, residential multifamily. You've got some mixed use districts. You've got some industrial districts. You've got planned development districts over on the side that created their own rules. You've got some smart code districts that are out there. This type of project provides us an opportunity to step back and think about, is that the right toolbox for you? The right toolbox to implement Plan 2040. Maybe some of those districts could be consolidated with very similar purposes or similar uses. Maybe you don't have some of the districts you need, like some mixed use districts to implement Plan 2040. So you might have some comments about the lineup of districts in Lawrence. Similarly, you know, the land use is allowed within the districts. They'll have a use table, but it's a little bit dated at this point. And we've already heard comments from a lot of the stakeholders about the need to really do a close look at the slate of residential use types to make sure that you're allowing a diversity of residential uses. We've heard about the maybe some inflexibility in the industrial use types. And so you might have some comments about particular uses in the city that that have been controversial or that you'd like to see improved. One of the big lenses that we'll be looking at in the new code is not just greenfield development, but making sure that you've got a tailored code that recognizes infill and redevelopment opportunities and thinks about maybe relaxing certain rules for unusual lot sizes, things like that. So are there places in Lawrence that would be especially good for infill and redevelopment? What would those look like? What would some of the barriers in the current code be to infill and how can we address those? There's a whole bucket of process issues here too. Development review. Who makes what decisions? What have you delegated down to the staff? What is the planning commission deciding? What are the criteria, by which you're deciding a rezoning? What's the nitty gritty details, the site plan application? All those types of things are on the table in a project like this. We can step back and think about efficiency. Are you getting the small stuff through as fast as you can so that you can reserve your officials' time for the bigger, more important projects that have community-wide impacts? So y'all might have comments about process. We've already heard from several of you in the room about y'all's experience in the system, just submitting rezoning applications and challenges you've had with that. This is another big lens that we'll think about: equity and inclusion. And we're talking here both about the development of a new code and then also the application of a new code. Is it equitable in terms of all members of the Lawrence community? Is it inclusive? And does everyone have an opportunity to participate in an equal level? Again, both in the development of the code and its outcomes. Got a catch-all down here at the bottom. I haven't covered a lot of stuff. Again, sustainability is a good example of things that you all mentioned as priorities, but that's not here. Transportation is another important one as well. Just generally, what's the biggest criticism, if any, that you have about the current codes? And maybe you might want to flip that. You might want to just say, what's the thing you like the most about the current code? Maybe it's the new Article 9 that needs to be carried forward. But just anything that we haven't covered up here that you really want to emphasize as your priority for the code. Again, totally not an exclusive slide, but you all have just demonstrated that you've got a real wide range of interests. And so this is to get you thinking about the full range of issues on the table. Our job later on, when we come back with the assessment report, is going to help organize all these thoughts, organize all this feedback that we've heard, and to start to suggest some options and some examples from other places. But right now, we're just trying to listen, and we're just trying to hear about y'all's priorities. So we're going to go back. We're going to go back around the table. And this is big picture stuff. I guess before we jump into the responses, I would remind you, let's see, we have the survey online. Elizabeth mentioned that. And you'll be able to give us a lot more detail there than you can cover today. And we're also going to leave the boards up after the open houses out in the hall. And so if you want to just stick around after the meeting, you're welcome to put comments up there.
And I'll jump in here before, and maybe we'll have Marcy say a couple things. One, we'll all get a chance to weigh in on things. So, this is the first of many, so you don't have to say everything today. Hopefully we can focus on two things. But I do think, I think I want to hear at least from, obviously, do what you want, but I want to get kind of hear really what the big picture issues are. And they're going to come back through, not so much, again, Nick might have a problem with Article 9, Section 15(2). We don't necessarily need to get to that detail. Kind of big issues. But I know Nick has lots of the big issues. And those are some of the ones I'm most interested in. So I'm going to start, and then we'll go back to Marcy and we'll go around. Number one and number two, I've done a lot of, not every place has zoning districts and land uses. And how far do we go? Do we need all the zoning districts? Houston doesn't even have a zoning code. They have 1,400 square foot lot sizes. And California has ADUs. Minneapolis doesn't really have zoning districts. I'm really interested in if Plan 2040 says we're going to be environmental, so we're going to be dense, we're going to have infill, and we have an affordable housing issue. I'm really interested in a code that allows that, allows density, allows for multimodal transportation. And I don't necessarily want this to be a tweak of the code we have now. I want this to be here are our goals, how are we going to get there? And that could be ADUs, that could be minimum lot sizes, that could be little or no zoning districts. I'm very interested in all those, big picture concepts. But mostly go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna say that zoning districts, we need to look at more opportunities for mixed use. Because it's gonna work better if there is residential and commercial and maybe a little industrial combined. I hope we can identify some areas that could benefit from redevelopment and increased density. But coming from the neighborhood that has the highest density in Lawrence, I want to see that more shared throughout the community rather than just focused. So there we go.
I always say that neighborhoods are like mixed breed dogs. They do the best when they're mixed. And it's kind of an uncouth way of saying it probably, but it's a good, I think people get it. Like, you know, they're more resilient and you have a good mixture. And so from my silo in affordable housing, the last thing we want to do is build Cabrini Greens, right? We've learned to not have projects that where we put, you know, lowest income people all together. So I feel like the biggest challenge to not do that is development code. And so having that mixture where and then there's not a project or that side of town or that area, but if it's assumed that it's built in every neighborhood, then there is no that neighborhood, right? So it's a way to be inclusive without forcing one neighborhood to be inclusive and the other one doesn't have to be. And so I really think we have this opportunity because Lawrence is not so divided. We have some really kind of historically mixed use and mixed size neighborhoods. And so we really could redefine that and look at, you know, allowing different types of buildings. And then density doesn't become a bad word if we can have ability to create community and family type buildings and lovely green spaces and sustainable trails. Then you don't need a giant yard to mow. You've got green space to travel in. So some of that is really being more creative than what our code allows us to do right now. So that's really what I challenge us to do.
Good. After listening to the last couple of days of feedback across all these different topics, I find it difficult to choose two that I put at the top of the list. And instead, this may be copying out, but the big issues that we have seem to cut across many of those things. And what I wrote down for really understanding the task was housing and how we get at the housing stock we need to accomplish both the anticipated growth as well as affordability. And then how do we remove friction and cost from commercial development and growth so that we can pay for all of this? Those are the kind of the categories that I think about it. And if I'm forced to just choose that, I'm not sure I can. I can make a case for any one of them.
I agree. I'm in the same position. My focus obviously is on housing. That's my area of interest and that's part of why I'm here. So I think we need to look at ways in the code to diversify our housing stock. We've got a lot of single family, we've got a lot of apartments, but how do we diversify that and do more ADUs, do more duplexes or triplexes? Is there an appetite for tiny homes? I think our market has needs at every single level, and I think we should be exploring ways to not only add to our housing stock, but to diversify it. And that doesn't just mean building new housing stock. That means how do we rehab housing? How do we repurpose housing that we already have? And right now, there's not a lot of flexibility in our code to do those kinds of projects. So looking at ways to create some flexibility, both to Rebecca's point, to sort of diversify what are in different neighborhoods, but also diversify how we're approaching housing development and trying to encourage that and make it a little easier for those of us in the community, for not us, those of you in the community that are actually out there developing housing stock for us.
Yeah, great. I would reiterate everything you just said, but also add to the idea of like for construction, more accessible commercial development and industrial to help supply the demand of just construction in Lawrence. So we're not looking outside of Lawrence to bring suppliers and vendors and subcontractors in. There's a big need within our own industry of construction to find resources. And it'd be great to have facilities in Lawrence that can house them and create taxable revenue.
So I just want to make sure I understand the prompt correctly. You said top 1 or 2 of any of those or in just the zoning district?
No, on the whole slide, all the topics. And it
Okay.
doesn't have to be on the slide. It could be your top priorities for the project, even if they're not.
Okay, I think I can do that. First one is under zoning districts. If you've all heard of the idea of a 15-minute neighborhood, a couple of folks have already touched on that. But the idea that everything that you need for daily life, except maybe your job, is available within a 15-minute walk or bike from where you live. There are a couple neighborhoods that are like that in Lawrence, but definitely not all of them. And as the son of a transportation planner, I've been kind of passively absorbing this stuff for pretty much my whole life. So a really fun statistic, super fun, is that 84% of all car trips that are made at afternoon rush hour are not for work. So if we can start to chip away at that 84% by being able to walk to stuff that you need to do anyway, whether that's the soccer field, the school, church, that'll severely reduce the amount of cars that have to be on the road at any one time. So again, I'm a transportation guy. This is kind of where I stand, but the other one is under equity and inclusion. So I guess there's kind of a couple to choose from, but I guess just in general, as you probably know, America and Canada are pretty car dependent, right? Cars are expensive. Cars are getting much more expensive. Gas is getting much more expensive. A lot of people can't drive or should not be driving. But everybody kind of has to. If you want to go anywhere in most cities and most part of the US, you have to have a car. And that's really tough. Folks who don't have a license, can't get one, are disabled. And that's kind of a huge equity issue. Is that we have a bus system and it's okay, but buses work a lot better when you have density and mixed uses. We have sidewalks, they're great, but if it takes an hour to walk anywhere, it doesn't really matter, right? So equity in transportation depends greatly on equity in development and regulations as well.
I have heard a lot of interesting conversations in land over the years, and I'll drill down into a couple that I think really dovetail with stuff that folks have already talked about. On the one hand, I hear a lot of talk about, notice requirements when someone comes forward, it's site plan or, zoning variance or something, who gets noticed, what radius, the lead time for the notice. That is a perennial conversation. I'm sure that Jeff he's aware. Okay, this isn't the first time he's heard that. But yet there's always room for improvement there. And like I said, that is a perennial thing that gets talked about, in that organization. But I'll also tell you something else that gets talked about in that organization is we've heard when builders and developers have come and talked with us about, the state of play in Lawrence. We talk about, let's build affordable houses. Okay, how do you build an affordable house when the land costs $100,000? The bank won't loan us the money to build a $200,000 house on a $100,000 piece of land. It isn't going to happen. And so we're cognizant that we need to do things. So here I talk about we need to drill down on requirements like notice, but yet we're also cognizant we want to do things that make it so that builders and developers can add stock to the community and do so in ways that are perhaps less onerous, that give them freedom to do what we want them to do. We talk about affordable housing or high density, but yet we've talked about it here today. We have to put the pieces in place so it can actually happen, this high density, this mixed use, these affordable houses. So those are things that we talk about a lot, within the neighborhood associations.
I had a list of things here. Probably my 2 things were kind of land use. all of our comprehensive plans now are talking about infill development and higher dense type developments. And as an applicant, when you bring forward those types of projects, they usually aren't looked on very favorably by the neighbors. So what you end up finding, it can be you can have staff approval, you can have traffic study that's fine, you can have everything's perfect. You're like, oh, this is the best application I've ever had. But if you get down there and the neighbors stand up and they're the constituents of your elected officials, it might not go your way. And so the hardest part is, if we're going to make this plan and say, these are the zoning districts, this is what we want, this is Plan 2040, this is how we want to grow. You got to approve the plans, you got to approve the projects. You got to find a way to make it happen, because otherwise I'm not going to be bringing stuff like that forward. The second thing is the development review. Man, if I don't have to send an engineer and an attorney to a neighborhood meeting that is attended by nobody again, that would really be useful.
Well, I have to agree with Rebecca in the analogy. I like the analogy she used for mixed use. I really feel that the sustainability is mixed use. And we need to be looking at live, work, play in every little community that we develop in this community. So little communities, little pocket neighborhoods, those sorts of things make a smaller, unaffordable living still great. And everyone deserves a healthy and great place to live, no matter what neighborhood they live in Lawrence. So the sustainability group, our advisory board has several things. And I would say initially, we are interested in anything renewable. So electrification, those sorts of things that can be considered at renewable energy sources into development, anything that can be solar ready. We've already submitted a draft ordinance for solar ready, and that hadn't been acted on yet. Also, we submitted a noxious weeds, invasive plants and ordinance that should include native plantings, more instead of just let's measure how tall the grass is. We want other plants, we want pollinators. We would like to see a lot of different types of landscaping options available. And I can say one thing, I was trying to get some different plants put in at one of our buildings, and our vice president said we can't, because if we do anything to that landscaping, it's going to change and what the code has said, and then we're going to have to add more trees or something like that. And I'm going, wait a minute, a code shouldn't dictate what's important to a property. And I still got to get into that, but those are the types of things that I feel like our sustainability advisory board would like to see. I would like to see, obviously, transportation, multimodal, anything that we can do to. It's fantastic, the bike paths and those sorts of things. There's still accessibility issues, though, and some parts of the neighborhoods don't have access. And then, obviously, commercial and industrial need to be included so that where people work, they can live nearby, so that they don't have to have a very expensive vehicle to get around.
I've got a lot of ideas for goals. I've got two I'll mention right now. One, we've had an office in Houston since 2009. And I got to tell you, the first 3 or 4 years down there with their zoning code lack. And quite frankly, it's not that they don't have a zoning code. They don't do building inspections. You just go build it, right? And the first 4 or 5 years down there, I was a wreck. I just could not believe that they would do this. And now you drive through some of those neighborhoods, and some of them that we're getting built right now and designing right now, and they're great. and because there's no zoning code, you imagine all these disasters and all this kind of crazy stuff is going to happen. And it doesn't. And you want a walkable neighborhood and you get a lot of pop-up businesses in the middle of neighborhoods that just fit right in. I just discovered one my last trip down there. A lumber yard is in the middle of a neighborhood. And these people, I thought this is just insane, and I talked to some of the people who live there and they thought this is the greatest thing in the world. I can, if I need to get some light bulbs or change the locks on my door, it's a West Lakes kind of deal. And they can, and it had zoning had nothing to do with it. And it was just an entrepreneur popped up, started this business, met with the neighbors and everybody just loves it. And, so my point with that is what I'd like to try to bring to the table is a little bit of how much are we adding to our codes that is just fear mongering. It's just stuff that we're just imagining that just snowballs on top of each other and it gets worse and worse and worse and has nothing to do with what actually happens in place. We overkill so much up here and I see it down there and they don't need any of that kind of oversight. They don't need any of that kind of supervision to make sure that we do it perfectly. Yeah, it's a little different down there, but they just, it's part of their culture down there. It's part of their nature and it works just great. And so I'd kind of like to try to bring a little bit of that to the table and saying, what have we got in our code that makes it 325 pages long that we don't really need because it's just something that we imagine might happen. So that's number one on the plate. Number two on the plate is we've got to jump the iron curtain. It's called the SLT that goes around our lawns. And we have got to figure out how to make our annexation policies and how we grow Lawrence passed over that deal. We haven't been able to get over it, in how many years? It's been, 6 years since they built the 2 lanes to finish it. And man, it is just impenetrable right now mentally for a lot of people. And we have got to figure out what are we doing that just is prohibiting us from planning on how to get over there, because a lot of our things that we do as a community, as we do as a city, as we do as a county, man, we hit that SLT and we just can't figure out how to get past it. And we have got to think of what are we doing in this code that is going to not only allow that to happen, but maybe it ought to encourage it to happen because it's going to happen sooner or later. And how can we help everybody see that happen? So those are my ideas. Jim.
The list can go on and on. I think some of the biggest ones is to increase density, to re-examine the districts, the zoning categories we have. We see absurd things happen, like neighborhood commercial. You put in a little neighborhood commercial spot and you have to be X number of feet from the next one. We just had one of those, and because we couldn't put in a second neighborhood of commercial, we had to change it to light industrial, which makes no sense. Those categories are not very useful anymore. We have the West Hills Business Park IBP, which has never worked. That one's come up a lot. So now we've got it up again. Yeah, it always keeps coming up. So we've got all these conditional zonings. I think we're up to 5 of them throughout there that are going to cause a problem in how the rest of that area develops. Instead of minimum lot sizes, maybe maximum lot sizes that encourage smaller, which helps with the cost of infrastructure. The more you can connect in the smaller section of pipe, the more efficient it is for the ongoing cost to the city. So this just goes on and on. We've come across so many absurdities, and I assume we're going to be looking at variance process. What would we have variances? Our non-conforming use section is almost you can't really tell what is and what isn't, and what's a permissible non-conforming use, and then just straight non-conforming use, and on and on. So there's a lot of areas, and we have contradictory definitions. So I'm hoping we can get to that. Plan 2040 was meant to be a guideline
to try to prompt more creativity in how we mix and match things. And so I'm hoping that through this process, we can just recreate districts. I'm not all for the Houston method of abandoning it altogether. Because some of that things end up built where they shouldn't have been built, so that they flood like crazy. And so there are still some standards that are going to have to stay in place at some level. But if we can get neighborhood grocery stores, if we can get walkability, which is promoted in the plan, but we don't have a code that allows that to happen now.
So the conforming, non-conforming use.
Yeah, that's how I start reading it. So because, our current code's been amended so many times, it's parts of it are just gibberish. So it makes it really hard for anybody to figure out what to do. So the planning commission, we're kind of in push and pull and get the whole discussion on the table to try to help the commissions. So we get that out. We take the main brunt of the neighbors that don't want duplexes by them, and try to explain, that field that's been there because nobody could develop it doesn't mean it's going to be a field forever. I mean, we even hit the point with the county where we had a group of people so worried about large scale solar installations that they tried to form a new town. So, but it's just this fear of change. And once I'm there, I never want to see it change. So I'm hoping through this and over the next 2 years, that's part of what can be out there in the public is change is not always scary. And I know, Rebecca, that's a big battle. And part of that is because of, you look on a map and the perception of where this is all happening it's because of lot sizes. So if we can have some control over lot sizes, at least in Greenfield, and make it easier to subdivide lots, we might make some progress on distributing housing types throughout the city.
Going last, everyone has touched on everything I had. But from being here in the 70s, Lawrence has always felt like a no growth town. I don't want it to change. I want it to be what it is. And there's a fear that there's something really wonderful about Lawrence and they don't want it to change, and they translate that to we can't change anything. And it's no growth. And the fact that we have an iron curtain, well, the SLT is to speak to that, and that some of us think of it as the iron curtain. So it's how do we create the high density that the mixed use that everyone's talking about, and how do we effectively turn from a town that feels like no growth to me to a town that does smart growth that is sustainable and walkable. I mean, when I think about retiring, I think about my 15-minute walk. So it's things like that I think are important to make it a city of the future, and to build a code that is easily understood with the graphics, and if everyone who's wanting to develop can understand it and feel that they're not going to be rejected, because we're having people leave the town because it's hard to build here. So we need to think about those complexities as we're building our new land development code.
Before it goes on, since I'm chair, I'll jump in. So about experience, just in Boston, and some of these comments, walking down, whether I was going to Boston University, you have these rows of brownstones, $1 million single family next to 14 college kids, next to a brownstone with a hairdresser on the bottom and people above, next to a restaurant, and I was thinking that I was there and trying to go with a couple of our friends out to Saltwell. I've not been there yet, but I hear great things about it. And thinking about how that, you couldn't do that in the town. You couldn't do that in Lawrence, That's illegal to have a restaurant in your house, but without the county, you can bring people and feed them in a small house. And again, just think about how the uses and the way we've done our zoning here. Our strict districts have really, I think, limited us in that. So I would really like to.
Don't we have a use permitted upon review that allows a restaurant in the house? In East Lawrence?
You can't. Difficult. Difficult, long process.
Long process.
Long process.
They got that.
They got that.
Point taken. So two big picture items. First one is Panasonic. And I would love to see a situation where our code was nimble enough to be able to navigate what's going to hit us, you know? And Marcy lived through, it was pretty incredible how quickly the legislature passed Apex, right? How long was that process?
Oh, weeks, which is,
pretty incredible, right?
yes.
So I would hope that we in our code would be able to be nimble enough to take weeks or less to be able to leverage what we don't know what these opportunities are going to be yet, but there will be opportunities. So that's number one. Number two, this is kind of an odd one that I'm just going to kind of elaborate on. At the Lead Center, we view ourselves as a customer service organization. That simply our means and our mode is the performing arts and the arts, right? Is there a way, I'm going to ask the consultants this, is there a way to infuse into the code a culture or a DNA of customer service? That when a project or a question comes up, that, you know, there's a way, it says in the code, you know, let's work our way to a yes. Let's figure this out together. Collaboratively, let's partner to do this, right? Instead of, you know, you see what I'm saying? So it's more of that's definitely, you know, the two things, Panasonic and culture.
That's a great way to wrap up.
Can I add another one? I'm sorry. I was just gonna say language, because there's been a lot of language brought up around the table that I don't know is we always have a clear definition on. You know, we talk about affordable housing. Are we talking about the HUD definition of what's, you know, subsidized government housing, or are we talking about generally affordable housing to everybody in the community? When we talk about density in Lawrence, Kansas probably looks very different than density in Boston or New York. What kind of density are we talking about when we use that language? And so just making sure that we have defined terms and that we're all on the same page when we're talking about those concepts.
And I have one other thing too that I should have mentioned, because we discussed it on our Sustainability Advisory Board. We need, as much as we believe that Lawrence is educated on sustainability and all of these development issues, they are not. And that's the reason you get the NIMBY syndrome, because people are afraid that things are going to disrupt their lives. But if there's education about what does sustainability look like and infused into development, somehow we need to do boots on the ground instead of just, we don't need a pamphlet. You know, we need real life experiences for people to understand this could be cool. Not everybody can go to Boston. Not everybody can go to Houston. Many of the people in this town have not been to Boston, Houston. But how we can get people over the hump about being afraid of change that will make their lives better, but not change that will ruin the Lawrence feel and community.
Just to get to both of your points, those are great. One of the reasons why a project like this takes a while, you know, it takes 2 years or so, is because we've got to do that work of educating the community about all the different steps that we're going through and making sure that when we use terms like density, that we have a shared understanding of the concepts that we're talking about. And so it's just, we've got to be methodical. We've got to be transparent, and we'll have to, you know, start off with understanding what the big picture issues are, and then bring y'all some ideas from other places about communities that have addressed some of this stuff. Maybe it's Houston, maybe it's some alternatives as well. But And let's just start, putting stuff on the table and see what has some traction. And then we'll start moving forward with some of those ideas. But you're exactly right. There's a lot of education here about these ideas because people fear the unknown and they fear change. And a lot of people are concerned about the current code because they feel like it's black box and they feel like they don't understand really the criteria that are being used to make decisions. And there's just some gray areas in there that are just leading to some inconsistency. So we'll be focusing on that. And Derek, to get to your point about culture of customer service, that's a really good opportunity to just emphasize that the code doesn't operate in a vacuum. And the city of Lawrence has a lot of other efforts underway that are going to influence how effective this code is. The operations of the planning department and the other departments of the city are going to play a key role in how effective this code ultimately is. And creating that culture of service starts with the way a code is written and making sure it's user-friendly and well illustrated and easy to understand. But it's also making sure that the staff understands how to implement that new code and how to explain the changes in the code to the public. And that when the new code goes online, we've got good training opportunities to explain to people how things might be different than what they have now. And maybe moving forward, it's doing things like assigning ambassadors to major projects so that you're going to have a consistent staff member to shepherd something through all the way. We can bring in examples of things like that have been done in other places. But you're right, there needs to be an attitude from the city that, yeah, we've identified what we want to see in this new code. We haven't just said what we want to prohibit. We've described what we want, and this is how we're going to make it easy for you to get there. I think that's an important part of these projects. But y'all are doing a lot of stuff in Lawrence, and I just want to make that point. One of our jobs is to make sure that we understand the full planning and regulatory and political context of all this stuff, so we can help move forward with those other parts. You all have a lot of experience with projects like this, Lawrence. What are our biggest challenges? What are you kind of sitting there not saying, but you're thinking we need to really know about?
So
televised meeting here.
It's a really general thing, but I think the overall timeline is kind of concerning. So I totally understand why it has to be 2 years long. But say Austin, Texas, for example, has been in the midst of Code Next talks for like 5 years now. Yeah. Meanwhile, their housing costs have skyrocketed to be some of the worst in the nation. So like we're already sitting on an affordable housing crisis. We probably have some ideas that are generally agreeable upon early on. Is there any chance, and I don't know if you necessarily have the answer, this is more of a city commission and planning department thing, to implement something? Because at this point, we basically closed off 2 of the pressure escape valves for growing population. It's really hard to annex, and it's also really hard to do infill development, just like it's always been.
Yeah.
So like now we got 2 years where basically the clock has stopped, but the ticker keeps going up in terms of prices. So it seems a little bit urgent to get something out there at least.
So it is a bit of a question for the city, and we don't want to kind of rejigger the scope right now. But I'll tell you that as we do these projects, sometimes we get that question a lot, and sometimes we start talking about low hanging fruit or just really emergency issues that maybe should be front-loaded and maybe should be looked at through short-term amendments while the rest of the process goes on in the background. Now, I'll tell you, there's pros and cons to that kind of approach, because anytime you start to try to front load something, it's going to take energy away potentially from the larger project. So you always need to be aware of that concern, but we've done that a number of times. I worked in a community in Arizona, and we were doing a large zoning code update like this, but they decided to front load the protection for their native cacti, because that was a really important thing to that community. And they had an emergency situation where they were losing those. They also wanted to really front load multifamily design standards because they were getting what they felt were really poor quality apartments. So they front loaded that piece. And we have examples of other ways of front loading pieces. So you can do it. You just always need to think about the trade-offs in terms of demands on your staff to shepherd multiple projects at the same time and things like that. But it's a great idea to think about. And as we roll out the assessment report and we start to give you the list of all the different things to move forward on, priorities will start to emerge in your minds. And there might start to be a consensus on maybe some things should start to move forward. Good question.
Thanks, helps.
And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, this annexation, we're looking at annexation policy, we're looking at now. Yeah, so that's moving ahead.
We also have 2 neighborhood plans that are currently underway, one west of K-10 and the other is in East Lawrence at the moment. Yes, were identified as the top priorities in implementing Plan 2040. So it's the annexation and getting neighborhood plans going.
So for clarity, Brad, you were saying, and Jeff, you were saying that so annexation is being looked at right now. How does that translate into timeline?
You know, it's something we've had on the table for a while now, and annexation is governed by state statute more than it is by the land development code. So it's just a way of having those policies in place to kind of help link back into what Plan 2040 says when policies or excuse me, when someone brings an annexation forward. That's been working on it for a while. We've gotten some other projects that have popped up and, as kind of Matt alluded to, slowed down some of the workload on it, but it's ongoing. We hope to be wrapping it up in the year, but
Calendar year. Yeah.
that's the hope, but as we've all kind of learned in recent times, anything can pop up that we weren't expecting. So we hope to hold true to that.
This kind of brings up one, I'm sorry, Phil.
I don't care. I'm just you were asking for landmines out there, right?
Yeah.
So mine is Plan 2040. I'm not a fan of it. And if we're designing this, your work around 2040, then I think you're starting with potentially some flawed beginnings.
And when we were talking in an earlier meeting today about infrastructure, you made a similar comment, and then you elaborated on some of the annexation policies and the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and the community benefit concepts.
Right.
And that's what you're suggesting might be.
Yeah, and 2040's built so much around that tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 concept. I mean, it is totally intertwined through everything throughout there that I think cleaning that up is needed. And and I think that affects all of 2040, that a lot of the language. I mean, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and it is a key part of the growth and development section in Plan 2040. But there is a lot of Plan 2040 beyond that growth and development section that provides really good guidance on things like multimodal transportation and sustainability.
Yeah.
But point taken.
Yeah.
Other language.
There's about 3 paragraphs in chapter 3, basically, because nothing else had any controversy when it came out of the planning commission, went to the city commission, but for 3 paragraphs. And it was the community benefit, and then whether it should be may or shall in another one. But then it went around to the county commission back. I mean, it went around twice before it was approved, but it was all about 3 paragraphs, basically, because there weren't many negative comments about anything else in that plan during the process. It all focused on the annexation policy and the community benefit, which is why the planning commission identified getting annexation rules done as the highest priority.
And that's underway.
One comment.
Gary was trying to jump in.
Not specifically about the code, but about how this lands over time. Every large scale transformation project I've seen that's failed has been because change management adoption has been under resourced. I don't know how planning commission stays so calm with everything that's going on. You guys work your brains out from impossibly early to impossibly late. There's questions about prioritization there. I just want to make sure that as a community that we understand what's required, what Jeff needs in terms of resources, the money, the scope, the ability to get help in prioritization. The number of things that are on their plate right now, it's just impossible to all get done. How do we help make sure that they've got what they need, the right priorities and the air cover to be successful getting this done?
Yeah.
We've got to make sure that they're covered.
I like your phrase change management because it is
absolutely
a lot of fundamental systemic change that's potentially on the table. I like Nick's reference to Code Next in Austin as an example. Some of you might not be familiar with that, but Austin, obviously a much bigger city, embarked on a comprehensive code update a number of years ago. And it was a complex project for a complex that was growing very fast. But in terms of this change management issue, they did some things in the management of that project that really hurt them. in the end in terms of not being methodical, not trying to educate the community about the incremental steps as they moved along, not trying to just develop a shared understanding of some of those key concepts. And so they as an example, they released a full draft of 1,000+ page code at one time without a whole lot of, annotations or examples. And it was an example of how I think you can, it was done for understandable reasons, and staff resources and things, but in terms of change management, it was a shock to the system. And it resulted in a lot of immediate pushback from some parts of the community that could have been avoided if it had been a more methodical, managed process.
Single greatest source of failure. Single greatest.
Let's get to Marcy was first, I think, and then we're back.
Okay, so I want to say we're all interested in affordable housing.
Mhm.
But I think we need to recognize that new construction is not going to be the majority or any of affordable housing. So the idea that you can build something now that makes it affordable without some kind of subsidies is not going to happen. So we're not going to make rules that make new construction affordable. So we're going to continue to look at existing housing or changes to hotels or other existing properties provide that affordable housing.
Potentially historic resources as well.
Right.
So, and does that go back to our definition of terms though, right?
Right.
So you're using affordable housing in one specific circumstance, not generally market-based affordable housing.
Right.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, again, we need to be careful about our language that we're using.
Absolutely. But I'm just saying, the idea that we can change enough things in our code
Mhm.
to make building available for people that earn $45,000 a year. There are costs to development and construction and materials that are not going to let that happen.
Let's go to Rebecca and then Tim.
A thought on that process that we do have an affordability crisis in this 2-year does make me very nervous. Have you seen communities that have done some pilot projects to test the new ideas in that interim with any success? Because I feel like that could be a solution where if you're very transparent that we're going to try this out and see what happens, particularly on an affordable housing development, so that we can test, like, if we remove parking in this, that lowers our cost, does the world end or not?
Yeah.
And that we do that, we can do that with a few things in the meantime, which actually allow us to test what incentives are needed to make it more affordable or dense.
Yeah, and I would kind of answer with the same short-term amendments concept that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes that short-term amendment idea can be used to test new approaches or just to test, to rewrite parts of the code that are just especially broken. So you can go ahead and get that out of the way and maybe test some new ideas about code structure or something along the way that you can roll out in a larger way. I've seen communities rewrite their parking standards as a first step and use that as a template for rewriting the overall code. So that could be an example. You also just made a point about incentives that's really worth mentioning at this table. One of the real benefits that we often get from a group like this is figuring out what incentives are meaningful to you. Because we often hear, yeah, we want to have flexibility. We want to build incentives into the code. But incentives oftentimes can be local, and you all know specific pressure points in the system that you think you would like some relief from. So that's something to be keeping in mind is this feedback that we'd like to hear from you all as incentives that you think are meaningful. Tim.
I was gonna make one quick point was it's possible we don't have an affordability and housing issue if we maybe have higher wages too. Some better jobs might also pay more, and then we don't have as large of an affordable housing issue too. The largest employers we have too is we don't have much of a commercial tax base. Some of our biggest employers are university, hospital, USD 497. A lot of those, a lot of those are not, property tax paying businesses. So if we had maybe a little bit different tax base, maybe some of these things, different employers here, larger employer base, that maybe some of those issues might resolve themselves as well.
Stepping outside our scope.
Yeah, right, sure.
So if we're talking about concerns or landmines, I mean, I think there's two perceptions that come to my mind that are going to be sort of the elephant in the room. One is that there is a perception that the city of Lawrence is a no growth, no development place, that the planning department, Jeff knows I like him a lot, but the planning department has a reputation for being difficult and being hard to get projects through, and the process is overly onerous. And I think that deters a lot of projects from even getting started. And so overcoming that perception, and sort of the flip side of that, and maybe a competing perception, is there is a perception among some in the community that developers are bad. That I don't know if it's generations of kids watching Scooby-Doo where you pull off the mask and it's always a real estate developer under there. But there is this perception that real estate developers are the bad guy. And most of our developers here in Lawrence are people that have lived here their whole life. Or, they've got kids or grandkids that go to school here. They care about the community as much as anybody. And trying to overcome that perception and getting away from both of those perceptions so that we can get back to a more collaborative approach and actually work towards that common good, I think is a big, like I said, elephant in the room we're going to have to deal with.
Okay. So, sorry, do you want to go?
No, I was just going to say Panasonic is going to change things because whether we want to, whether we'd like to, we're going to grow. So we have to address that as part of this.
What zoning districts and land uses do we need then to be prepared?
Right. And that's what we need to discuss. But it's not only Panasonic, it's the other businesses that are coming along with that. Yeah. So we have an opportunity to welcome that. But it's coming nonetheless.
So their 2 years just got cut down to 6 months.
Thanks. But what districts and uses do we need? I mean, well, other communities have faced similar, pressures from big new employers like that. And one of the things we'll need to look at is a new slate of districts that allow the density that a lot of you all have been calling for at scales and in forms that protects surrounding stable neighborhoods, that can be served with the infrastructure that you have, that can be done efficiently and through procedures that often are by right or quick, with some predictability. So I think giving you a zoning toolbox that allows for some developments like that is a good start, to accommodate some of the growth pressures that you're likely to see. Now, this is an important thing to emphasize, though. We're giving you a zoning toolbox that's going to have a revised lineup of districts. We're not rewriting the zoning map as part of this process. So that's just important to keep in mind. We can think about those areas in concept, and we can think about where a neighborhood commercial node, makes sense in concept. We don't have to necessarily apply it to the map that is part of this process. Now, oftentimes communities will follow up projects like this immediately with changes to the zoning map where they can apply those new tools. That doesn't have to be the case. And one of the parts of change management that we haven't gotten to in this conversation yet, but we will, is helping you think through ultimately changes to the zoning map that might make sense. And again, this is another category where there's probably going to be some low-hanging fruits that you want to go ahead and tackle immediately. And some of this stuff is going to take longer. If you come up with some significantly new mixed-use districts that you don't have anything like now, you're probably not going to want to apply that immediately. You're going to want to go through more of your neighborhood plans and think about where those would apply, but you'll have them in the toolbox. But maybe some of the simple zoning district consolidations or some of the tweaks that can happen immediately. But we'll get there. We'll get to those conversations about change management. I love the phrase. But it's just keep in mind, we're not necessarily doing the zoning map right now.
Almost out of time here.
No, so you had a comment that I interrupted?
Oh, sorry. So you mentioned this in your proposal, and I don't know if it is hardwired into the scope, but you mentioned that there are other things that affect the built environment that aren't necessarily the zoning code. If you've been to Houston, as you said, it doesn't have a zoning code. Sure looks pretty suburban outside the urban core, though. It looks extremely like every other city in the country. And I think the reason is it's not the only way to achieve the built environment through the zoning code. Even if you don't have one, you can still make it look just like everywhere else. So there are other documents and regulations that the city of Lawrence has that make the city look the way it does. Subdivision regulations, I believe, are actually in the land development code, but I do think those kind of bear special concern. The design standards from the Municipal Services Organization govern how wide streets can be and how curvy they can be, and specify some pretty wide streets that are frankly probably unnecessary, even from the fire code standpoint. And then there's also the building code. So I'm not that kind of engineer, I'm not an architect, but there's recently been a couple developments around the country that have been taking a hard look at the IBC, which is pretty much universally adopted at this space, and seeing how can we tweak it a little bit to allow stuff that used to be perfectly fine and now all of a sudden isn't, like a single loaded apartment building, right? Like only a single staircase, not really allowed anymore, right? And then there's the Plan 2040, like Philip was saying, where, do we really go about the community benefit correctly? Should it maybe just be something quantifiable instead of subjective and rather capricious? Is there a better way to do this, right? So I don't know if your scope applies to that or not, or if there's a way to spin off side projects, but as representative of the transportation sector, there's really only so far we can go with the zoning code before we start to have to look about why are the buildings spaced so far away from each other? Because of street design standards, right?
So the scope of this project is within the zone. So that's strictly what we're looking at. But again, we need to understand the context that the zoning code operates within. And that means all those other departments that you mentioned. That means public works, that means building, that means code enforcement. And so as part of the stakeholder interviews that Elizabeth talked about, we've been reaching out to those other departments to try to understand how they interact with code, zoning code, where some of the conflict points might be. And so where we hear about those things, we capture that. And maybe it's not going to result in a change in the code itself, but it might result in some commentary in the assessment report or some memo along the way. But we again try to just understand the system within which the code operates. We want this thing to be successful. And so we recognize that that's going to have to result in changes outside the code as well.
Okay.
We are supposed to be done at 6. We have a little bit more time.
We have a little public comment. We have a little time for public comments.
Okay, should we stop now?
Yes, address community benefit fast. It was left wishy-washy in Plan 2040 in anticipation of getting definition in this process, which is why right now it's very subjective and nobody knows what it means.
Okay, that makes sense.
We're defining it. We're supposed to define it now.
Okay.
Should we stop now for public comments?
Yeah, let's do that, then make sure we have time. And obviously, there's lots of chances for public comment, but we have a couple people from the public here that, Michael, there's Ron, anyone have anything they want to say in this part of the session?
Delighted to hear the conversations today. I'm a current member of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board with Rebecca. And so the emphasis in your comments about how do we make housing more affordable, how can we promote mixed use neighborhoods, how can we overcome the resistance to density initiatives, all of those are high priority to me. I would say that the comment that I think I agree with the most is that is in regards to Panasonic. We're going to be overwhelmed with a tsunami of market forces by Panasonic. The number I've heard is that the total population increase direct from Panasonic hires, from all the subs, all the suppliers, family members that come in, we could be looking at a Northeast Kansas increased population as a result of the plant approaching 100,000 people. And I don't think we've got any idea yet how to get Lawrence ready for that. Now, they're not all coming here. Imagine what would happen to our property values if even 10% of them tried to come here. But we're going to be the bright blue spot in a red state that a lot of technology workers, a lot of recent college graduates, a A lot of young families are going to be looking for opportunities to live here. They're going to crush our real estate market. We've just got to have more housing across the board. And I look forward to the discussion that you all have to help get us there. Thank you.
Chris? Okay.
In other words, be careful what you wish for. It's coming. Michael Allman with Sustainability Action Network. Thanks for the opportunity. My organization focuses a lot on climate issues, energy issues, and how the built environment is affected by all that. One reason that we're so much interested in density is because we want preservation of our prime farmland. We saw the process taking place and we're grateful for Lawrence to develop Plan 2040 that tries to stem urban sprawl by going towards density and mixed use. But we see it not just for the purpose of preserving farmland, but when you have more density and not extending infrastructure as far out, you save costs. The cost of extending infrastructure goes up exponentially the farther out you go. I think everybody understands that. But in the bigger picture, with the question of infrastructure, there's what is the relationship of how we extend infrastructure to how we plan where we're going to grow. And this morning I mentioned, that there seems to be a breakdown in the discussion between the utility department with their master utility plan to extend infrastructure and the planning department with where and how we're going to grow. How does that conversation play out in this discussion here? Which dog which tail is wagging which dog there? That same question also applies to extending roads. I think everybody in this room probably understands that roads spur development and development triggers growth of roads. They both reinforce each other. That question is going to be played out in this discussion here, I would assume. So those are two big issues that I think are important. Also, the third one is the density and mixed use question that has all kinds of benefits beyond just preserving farmland from sprawl. It's the infrastructure cost. It's the efficiency of the use of the scarce land. If we have land within the city that is subdivided into 10 smaller lots instead of 2 big lots, it's much more efficient use. It brings it more closer to being affordable, even at market rates. I don't know, I can't pencil it myself. But in theory, that would make sense. It improves the benefit for transit. Transit reaches a threshold of efficiency and ridership with the more concentration of population. And affordability. We all know that a denser use of land makes it more affordable. When I think of affordable and mixed use land, I think of what Brad said about brownstones. Maybe that could be part of the vision we have here, to achieve that mixed use. And I have to disagree with you, Mr. Struble. Having been on the receiving end of an industrial salvage yard immediately adjacent to residences in my neighborhood that we fought for 6 years, I don't want a free-for-all and carte blanche for commercial everywhere in my neighborhood. Some kind of commercial use, yes, like accessory commercial uses. The things like Brad mentioned, that we have a restaurant next to, a dwelling next to a bunch of college students. That can be done, and it could be done rentals and owner. I think it's going to take a creative discussion how we get this all to fit together. But I think increasing height and density is going to be a key part of that. And then coordinating The infrastructure build out and the plan for where we're going to grow is going to be another big part of that. And I'm going to have a lot of particular detailed proposals that I'm going to bring back to this group about some of that. A lot of it having to do with multimodal transportation and transit and how we can achieve a reduction in our carbon footprint. And I was glad to see that at the head of the list, the purpose of what you're doing here today is climate change. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for the comments, and I think we have little next steps.
There might be someone Zoom.
Yeah, oh, Zoom, that's true. Any public comment on Zoom? Okay.
Come on, Kyle.
Okay, that brings us to the last, which is kind of next steps, where we go from here. I'm not sure who's, I think we have a little.
I think we have one short slide on. Up to one more. Okay, so our next steps on the project are to consider how to expand this first round of community outreach. We'd like to get more voices into that project. And so I'm thinking about ways, virtual and in real life, to expand that. It will probably take us a couple of weeks with staff to talk it through and get our next steps going. We'll share that with everybody as we do. Our next product is the code assessment. We will start drafting that. It usually takes us a few months to get through it, to gather all the input, particularly if we're going to do some more outreach. So we will probably be meeting with you guys sometime later this year. The beginning of the project, it takes a minute for everything to come together and get rolling. And so we're not going to ask you to meet regularly at this point in time. We're going to ask you to meet irregularly when there's something to look at and something to talk about. So we will get everyone an update about the upcoming schedule and let you know when we're going to ask you to be back and talk about this. Also, as we get that second round outreach put together, we'll invite everybody again. It's been really nice to spend time with you. And so we encourage your involvement in all of that also. So those are our short next few steps. I actually think we're going to try to do one more thing tonight. I'll just stay up here and back up a slide. So the boards that we shared at the outreach meetings are outside. Matt mentioned that earlier. And they're simple dot exercise boards or write a comment board. So you guys have, I'm sorry, proven yourselves expert in the subject. So we're not going to give you a ton of explanation, but the boards ask you to leave a comment about something you like, something you don't like, where you live, and questions you might have about the project. You're welcome to go look at them and just see what we're asking the public to do to participate. You're also welcome to participate. If you had anything that you weren't able to say tonight that you want to say and you want to add to it, we'll use the boards again as we do more outreach, and we're going to consider how to turn them into an electronic product. Our encouragement as you leave tonight is to kind of promote that survey. Let people know this project is going and get them involved, and we really appreciate that.
We have a lot more of these cards, so you guys all should take a cluster for your friends and your family.
Right, party favorites, flags.
Yes, take these, ask people to give their input. And certainly, we encourage all of you to, many of you are selected because you were associated with something or someone. And so please go back to those communities, tell them what's going on, tell them about the process, get their input, and bring it back either virtually or at our next meetings. I think this is going to be an exciting process, an important process. And again, thank you all for being here, and I look forward to working with you again. Again, it might be a little bit before you hear from us again. That's not because they're not doing anything.
When's the next meeting?
We don't know. To be determined.
Okay.
Kind of see where we get to, but we'll go from there. It'll pick up the pace later and after we get in, but.
We want an update within a month.
Oh, yeah, we'll definitely have updates. We'll definitely see emails and otherwise. We might not all get together for a little while until we have some more to process, but never fear, there'll be plenty of these in time.
A big thank you to the City Commission for initiating this. It's really important. And a thank you to the staff and the consultant. I think we're getting off on a great start.
And stop by the boards on your way out. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone on Zoom.